Picture this. Right now, as you watch this screen, your brain is living in the past. Not metaphorically, but literally. Every single thing you think you're experiencing in this moment actually happened roughly 1/10 of a second ago. The light hitting your eyes, the sounds reaching your ears, even the sensation of your own heartbeat. All of it is ancient history by the time your consciousness gets hold of it. You're not experiencing reality in real time. You're experiencing a carefully constructed, delayed broadcast, edited and processed by the most sophisticated prediction machine in the known universe. Your brain. Welcome to a journey into one of the most profound mysteries of human existence. I am your guide through this exploration of time, perception, and the beautiful illusion we call the present moment. Tonight, we're going to discover why your brain never experiences reality in real time, how it compensates for this fundamental limitation, and what this reveals about the very nature of consciousness itself. If you're settling in for the evening, getting comfortable, or simply letting your mind wander into quieter spaces, you've found the right place. This is where we slow down, breathe deeply, and explore the gentle mysteries that surround us every moment of every day. Whether you're here to learn, to relax, or simply to let your thoughts drift into something larger than the everyday, welcome. Before we dive into the depths of delayed perception, take a moment to notice something extraordinary. As you listen to these words, your brain is performing millions of calculations, making countless predictions, and weaving together a seamless experience of reality from fragments of delayed information. It's happening right now, beneath the surface of your awareness, a symphony of neural activity working tirelessly to present you with what feels like the present moment. The story we're about to explore touches everything. The way you see a smile form on someone's face, the way you catch a ball thrown your way, the way you experience the flow of music or the rhythm of your own breathing. All of it shaped by this fundamental truth that your brain is always, inevitably, running behind reality itself. So let's begin our gentle descent into this temporal mystery. Let's discover together why the present moment you think you're living in is actually a beautiful, necessary illusion. Deep within the architecture of your nervous system lies a simple, unavoidable truth. Information takes time to travel. When light bounces off an object and enters your eye, it must journey through layers of neural tissue, cross synapses, and traverse the complex pathways that lead to your visual cortex. This journey, though incredibly fast by human standards, is not instantaneous. The numbers tell a remarkable story. Visual processing in the human brain typically requires between 80 and 100 milliseconds. That might seem insignificantly brief, but consider what happens in that 1/10 of a second. A baseball, travelling at 85 miles per hour, covers more than 10 feet. A hummingbird completes several wing beats. A conversation shifts its emotional tone. The world moves on while your brain catches up. Neural transmission speeds vary dramatically throughout your body, creating a complex temporal landscape within your own nervous system. In the thick myelinated fibers that carry touch sensations from your fingertips to your brain, signals race along at roughly 100 meters per second. But in the thinner, unmyelinated fibers that transmit pain, the journey is much slower, sometimes taking a full second or more to complete. This variation in speed creates something beautiful and strange. When you stub your toe, you feel the immediate pressure and impact first, followed moments later by the deeper, more persistent ache of pain. Your nervous system is telling you the story of that collision in chapters, each arriving at its own pace, each adding a new layer to your understanding of what happened to your poor toe. As you consider this, notice how your own body demonstrates these principles right now. The sensation of air moving in and out of your lungs, the feeling of fabric against your skin, the subtle pressure of gravity holding you in place. All of these sensations are arriving at your consciousness with their own unique delays, their own temporal signatures. Yet somehow, your brain weaves them together into a single, coherent experience of being present in your body. The visual system faces particularly complex challenges. Unlike other senses, vision must process an enormous amount of information simultaneously. Every glance contains millions of data points about colour, movement, depth, texture, and form. Your retina alone contains over 100 million photoreceptors, each one capturing light and converting it into electrical signals that must be processed, compared, and integrated. But here's where it gets fascinating. Different aspects of vision are processed at different speeds. Your brain recognizes movement faster than it recognizes color. It detects the presence of faces more quickly than it identifies specific facial features. It's as if your visual system has multiple express lanes and local routes, all delivering their cargo to consciousness at slightly different times. Research has revealed that neurons in different parts of the visual cortex respond with varying delays. Some areas light up within 50 milliseconds of a visual stimulus, while others take 200 milliseconds or more to fully engage. This creates a cascade of recognition, understanding building upon understanding, detail layering upon detail, until finally your conscious mind receives what feels like an instantaneous, complete picture of the world around you. Take a moment to appreciate the magnitude of this accomplishment. Right now, your brain is integrating information from millions of sensors, each operating on its own timeline, each contributing its piece to the puzzle of perception. The fact that this feels effortless, that you experience a unified, coherent reality rather than a chaotic jumble of delayed signals, is nothing short of miraculous. The auditory system adds another layer to this temporal complexity. Sound waves travel through air at roughly 330 meters per second, while light travels at nearly 300 million meters per second. This means that for distant events you see before you hear, lightning flashes, then thunder rolls, a woodpecker's beak strikes, then the tapping sound follows. But your brain has learned to compensate for these differences. Through years of experience, it has developed sophisticated timing mechanisms that help synchronize what you see with what you hear. When you watch someone speaking, their lip movements appear to match their words, even though the visual and auditory information arrived at your brain at different times and were processed along different neural pathways. This synchronization isn't perfect though. Under certain circumstances, the illusion breaks down. If you've ever noticed that the audio seems slightly out of sync with the video on a poorly configured television or computer, you're experiencing a breakdown in this temporal binding. Your brain can only stretch and compress timing relationships so far before the illusion of simultaneity falls apart. The development of these timing systems reveals another layer of complexity. Children are born with relatively slow neural transmission speeds, roughly half the speed found in adults. Over the first few decades of life, neural pathways become more efficient, myelin sheaths thicken, and the brain's timing becomes increasingly precise. What feels like the simple act of reaching for a glass of water requires years of neural development to coordinate the timing between vision, proprioception, and motor control. This developmental aspect helps explain why children sometimes seem to live in a slightly different temporal world than adults. Their nervous systems are still learning to coordinate timing, still developing the predictive mechanisms that allow for smooth, coordinated interaction with the environment. Watch a toddler trying to catch a ball, and you're witnessing a nervous system still learning to compensate for its own processing delays. As you reflect on this intricate timing system, consider how it shapes every moment of your conscious experience. The feeling of presence you have right now, the sense of existing in a coherent, synchronized reality, is the product of countless timing adjustments happening beneath the threshold of awareness. Your brain is constantly calibrating, constantly fine-tuning its temporal coordination, ensuring that the symphony of sensation plays in harmony rather than chaos. But this raises a profound question. If your brain is always playing catch-up, always processing information from the past, how do you manage to interact effectively with the present moment? How do you catch a thrown ball, carry on a conversation, or navigate through a crowded room? The answer lies in one of the most remarkable features of the human brain, its ability to predict the future. Not in a mystical sense, but in a very practical neurological sense. Your brain doesn't just process delayed information, it extrapolates from that information, building models of what is likely happening right now based on what happened a fraction of a second ago. This predictive capability transforms your brain from a passive processor of sensory information into an active forecaster, constantly generating hypotheses about the present moment based on recent experience. It's this predictive power that allows you to function in real time, despite living in the past. And it's where our exploration takes us next. But before we venture into the realm of neural prediction, take a moment to sit with this fundamental insight. You are not experiencing reality directly. You are experiencing your brain's best guess about reality, assembled from delayed information and presented to consciousness as if it were happening now. This isn't a flaw in the system, it's a feature, a necessary adaptation that allows complex nervous systems to function in a dynamic world. As we prepare to explore how your brain compensates for these delays, notice how this knowledge might change your relationship to the present moment. Perhaps there's something both humbling and beautiful in realizing that what you call now is actually a carefully constructed narrative, a story your brain tells you about what it thinks is happening based on what it knows happened a moment ago. In the next part of our journey, we'll discover how your brain performs the remarkable feat of living in the future to compensate for experiencing the past, and how this predictive machinery shapes everything from catching a baseball to the flowing conversation of daily life. But for now, rest in this profound realization. The present moment, as you experience it, is one of the most sophisticated illusions ever created, crafted moment by the 3 pounds of neural tissue residing quietly in your skull. Your brain faces an impossible task. Every moment, it must coordinate actions in the present using information from the past. When a friend tosses you your keys, those keys are already airborne by the time the light reflecting off them reaches your visual cortex, yet somehow your hand moves to precisely the right location at precisely the right time to catch them. This seamless coordination requires something extraordinary. Your brain must become a time traveller, not in the science fiction sense of course, but in a very real neurological sense. To function in a dynamic world while processing delayed information, your brain has evolved into one of nature's most sophisticated prediction engines. It doesn't just interpret what has happened, it forecasts what is happening right now and even what is likely to happen next. This predictive capability emerges from one of the most remarkable features of neural architecture: the brain's ability to learn patterns and extrapolate from them. Every experience you've ever had contributes to a vast internal model of how the world behaves. Objects fall downward, not upward. Moving things tend to keep moving in the same direction unless something changes their path. Conversations have rhythms and flows that follow certain patterns. Your brain uses this accumulated wisdom to fill in the temporal gap between past and present. When it detects motion in your visual field, specialized neural circuits don't just register where an object was, they calculate where it should be now, accounting for the processing delay. This motion extrapolation happens automatically, beneath the threshold of consciousness, allowing you to interact with moving objects as if you were truly seeing them in real time. Take a moment to consider what's happening as you listen to these words. Your brain is not simply receiving and processing each sound as it arrives. It's actively predicting what comes next, using context, grammar, and meaning to anticipate the flow of language. This prediction allows you to understand speech in noisy environments, to follow conversations even when words are mumbled or unclear, and to experience language as a fluid, continuous stream rather than a series of discrete, delayed auditory events. The visual system demonstrates this predictive power most dramatically in what researchers call the flash lag effect. When a stationary object appears next to a moving object, your brain perceives the moving object as being ahead of where it actually was at the moment the stationary object appeared. This isn't an error in perception. It's evidence of your brain's motion prediction system in action, automatically compensating for processing delays by extrapolating the moving object's position forward in time. But prediction goes far beyond simple motion tracking. Your brain builds predictive models for virtually every aspect of experience. It predicts how surfaces will feel before you touch them, how foods will taste before you eat them, how conversations will unfold before they happen. These predictions shape your perception, creating expectations that influence what you notice, what you remember, and how you interpret ambiguous situations. Consider the remarkable phenomenon of catching a baseball. A professional batter has only a few tenths of a second to decide whether to swing at a pitch travelling over 90 miles per hour. During that brief window, the ball covers 60 feet, changing position dramatically, while the batter's visual system processes information that's already out of date by the time it reaches consciousness. Yet major league players successfully hit the ball roughly 30% of the time, an achievement that should be impossible given the delays in visual processing. They succeed because their brains have learned to predict not just where the ball will be, but when it will be there, coordinating complex motor movements based on extrapolated rather than directly observed information. This predictive machinery operates on multiple timescales simultaneously. Some predictions unfold over milliseconds, like anticipating the next note in a familiar melody. Others span seconds, like expecting a friend to finish a sentence you've heard them say before. Still others extend across minutes or hours, like the unconscious predictions that help you navigate your daily routine. As you reflect on this predictive capacity, notice how it might be operating in your own experience right now. Perhaps your brain is already anticipating how this sentence will end before the words reach your ears. Perhaps it's predicting the emotional tone of what comes next, the likely duration of this exploration, or how the concepts we're discussing might connect to ideas that follow. Your brain's predictive abilities extend into the social realm as well. where timing is crucial for successful interaction. When you're having a conversation, your brain is constantly predicting when the other person will finish speaking, allowing you to time your responses appropriately. It anticipates facial expressions, vocal inflections, and emotional shifts, helping you navigate the complex temporal choreography of human communication. This social prediction system helps explain why conversations can feel so natural and flowing when they're going well, and so awkward when they're not. When predictions align with reality, dialogue feels effortless. When they don't, when someone pauses longer than expected or responds in an unanticipated way, the conversation can feel stilted or uncomfortable. You're experiencing the friction between your brain's temporal expectations and the actual timing of social interaction. The development of these predictive systems reveals another fascinating aspect of temporal processing. Infants are born with relatively crude prediction mechanisms that become increasingly sophisticated through experience and neural maturation. A young child learning to walk is essentially training their brain's prediction system, developing the ability to anticipate how their body will respond to each movement, how surfaces will feel underfoot, and how to maintain balance in a dynamic environment. This learning process continues throughout life, with your brain constantly updating its predictive models based on new experiences. When you move to a new city, your brain must learn to predict traffic patterns, pedestrian behaviour, and the timing of daily routines. When you learn a new skill, whether it's playing a musical instrument or mastering a sport, you're essentially teaching your prediction system to operate in a new temporal domain. The neural mechanisms underlying these predictive capabilities involve some of the most sophisticated circuits in the brain. The middle temporal area, a region specialized for processing visual motion, doesn't just respond to movement. It generates predictive signals that help compensate for processing delays. When these areas are disrupted through injury or experimental intervention, the seamless coordination between perception and action begins to break down. Research using brain stimulation techniques has demonstrated that disrupting activity in motion-sensitive brain regions significantly reduces the flash lag effect, providing direct evidence that these areas contribute to temporal prediction. When the brain's prediction system is impaired, the illusion of real-time perception becomes harder to maintain, and the delays inherent in neural processing become more apparent. This raises profound questions about the nature of conscious experience. If what you experience as the present moment is actually your brain's prediction about what should be happening now based on what happened in the recent past, then consciousness itself might be fundamentally predictive rather than purely reactive. You're not just experiencing the world as it was. You're experiencing the world as your brain expects it to be. Consider how this might change your understanding of decision-making and free will. When you choose to reach for a cup of coffee, that decision emerges from a brain that's operating in predictive mode, anticipating the weight of the cup, the temperature of the coffee, the coordination required to bring it to your lips. Your choices are shaped not just by immediate circumstances, but by your brain's predictions about how those circumstances are likely to unfold. This predictive nature of consciousness helps explain why disruptions to routine can feel so disorienting. When events unfold differently than your brain predicts, when the familiar becomes unfamiliar, you experience a kind of temporal vertigo. Your prediction system must rapidly update its models, recalibrating its expectations to match a reality that has shifted away from anticipated patterns. But prediction is just one part of the story. Your brain doesn't simply extrapolate from the past to anticipate the present. It also engages in a more subtle form of temporal manipulation, one that involves integrating information across different timescales to create the illusion of simultaneity. This integration process, known as temporal binding, helps explain how your brain creates unified perceptual experiences from sensory information that arrives at different times and is processed at different speeds. As we prepare to explore this temporal binding process, take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary nature of what your brain accomplishes every moment. It takes information from the past, uses it to predict the present, and presents the result to consciousness as if it were immediate, real-time experience. This isn't deception, it's adaptation, a solution to the fundamental challenge of being a complex organism in a dynamic world. The more we understand about these temporal mechanisms, the more we realize that what we call the present moment is actually a sophisticated construction, a carefully crafted narrative that emerges from the brain's constant work of prediction, integration, and temporal coordination. In our next exploration, we'll discover how this construction process works, how your brain weaves together disparate streams of delayed information to create the seamless experience of being present in a unified, coherent world. Imagine you're listening to a symphony. The violins sing their melody, the cellos provide their rich harmonic foundation, the percussion marks the rhythm, and the brass punctuates with bold declarations. Each section of the orchestra sits in a different location, meaning the sound from each reaches your ears at slightly different times. Yet you don't hear a cacophony of delayed, disconnected sounds. You hear music, unified, coherent, beautiful music. Your brain accomplishes something remarkably similar every moment of your waking life. It receives information from different senses at different times, processes each type of information at different speeds, and somehow weaves it all together into a unified experience of reality. This process, known as temporal binding, is one of the most elegant solutions to the problem of delayed perception. Consider what happens when you watch someone clap their hands. The visual image of their hands coming together travels to your brain at the speed of light, while the sound of the clap travels much more slowly through the air. Additionally, your brain processes visual information faster than auditory information, creating even more temporal complexity. Yet you perceive the sight and sound as perfectly synchronized, as if they were a single event rather than two separate sensory experiences arriving at different times. This synchronization isn't automatic. It's the result of sophisticated neural mechanisms that actively coordinate timing across different sensory systems. Your brain has learned through countless experiences how long it typically takes for sound to travel from various distances, how long different types of sensory processing require, and how to adjust its temporal expectations accordingly. The precision of this temporal binding becomes apparent when it breaks down. If you've ever watched a movie where the audio track is slightly out of sync with the video, you've experienced what happens when temporal binding fails. The mismatch feels immediately wrong, even when the delay is just a few dozen milliseconds. Your brain has such precise expectations about temporal relationships that even small deviations become noticeable and disturbing. But temporal binding goes far beyond coordinating sight and sound. It encompasses the integration of all sensory experiences into coherent perceptual events. When you bite into an apple, your brain must coordinate the visual appearance of the apple, the sound of the crunch, the feeling of texture against your teeth, the taste on your tongue, and the smell reaching your nose. Each of these sensory experiences follows a different neural pathway, processes at a different speed, and arrives at consciousness with its own temporal signature. Yet you don't experience 5 separate sensory events happening in sequence. You experience eating an apple, a single unified experience that emerges from your brain's ability to bind these temporally disparate elements together into a coherent whole. This binding process requires your brain to make complex judgments about which sensory inputs belong together and which are separate events. The mechanisms underlying temporal binding reveal fascinating insights about how your brain constructs reality. One key principle is the use of temporal windows, periods during which your brain assumes that different sensory inputs are likely to be related to the same event. If visual and auditory information arrive within a certain time frame, typically around 200 milliseconds, your brain treats them as components of a single perceptual experience. These temporal windows aren't fixed. They adapt based on context, experience, and attention. In noisy environments, your brain expands its temporal windows, allowing for greater flexibility in binding sight and sound. When you're paying careful attention to timing, such as when learning to play music, these windows can become more precise. Your brain continuously calibrates its temporal binding mechanisms based on the demands of each situation. As you consider this binding process, notice how it might be operating in your current experience. The words you're hearing, the visual environment around you, the feeling of your body in space, the subtle sounds in the background. All of these are being woven together by your brain's temporal binding systems into a single, unified experience of being present in this moment. The development of temporal binding abilities provides another window into how your brain learns to construct coherent reality from delayed information. Infants are born with relatively loose temporal binding, which gradually tightens and becomes more precise throughout childhood and into adolescence. Young children sometimes struggle with tasks that require precise temporal coordination, not because they lack the motor skills, but because their temporal binding systems are still developing. This developmental trajectory helps explain why children often seem to inhabit a slightly different temporal world than adults. Their experience of simultaneity, of what belongs together in time, is still being refined. Watch a child trying to sing along with music, and you're observing a temporal binding system, learning to coordinate auditory processing with motor output and vocal timing. The social aspects of temporal binding add another layer of complexity to this process. Human communication relies heavily on precise timing. The rhythm of conversation, the coordination of eye contact and facial expressions, the subtle dance of turn-taking and dialogue, all require sophisticated temporal binding between social perception and social action. When you're engaged in conversation with someone, your brain is constantly binding together visual information about their facial expressions, auditory information about their voice, and your own internal sense of timing to create a coherent understanding of the social interaction. Disruptions to this temporal binding, whether due to fatigue, distraction, or neurological conditions, can make social interactions feel awkward or disconnected. The neural circuits responsible for temporal binding involve some of the most highly interconnected regions of the brain. Information flows not just from sensory areas to higher level processing centers, but also in the reverse direction, with higher level areas sending predictive signals back to sensory regions. This bidirectional flow allows your brain to use context and expectation to influence how sensory information is bound together in time. Recent research has revealed that temporal binding involves rhythmic oscillations in neural activity, with different brain regions synchronizing their electrical activity to coordinate the timing of information processing. These neural rhythms act like temporal reference signals, helping to align the processing of information across different sensory systems and different brain areas. Imagine these neural oscillations as a conductor's baton, keeping the various sections of your brain's orchestra playing in time with each other. When these rhythmic signals are disrupted, whether by injury, disease, or experimental intervention, temporal binding becomes less precise, and the unified nature of perceptual experience begins to fragment. The study of temporal binding has profound implications for understanding consciousness itself. If conscious experience emerges from the binding together of different types of information across time, then consciousness might be fundamentally about temporal integration rather than simple awareness. You are conscious not just because your brain processes information, but because it weaves that information together into coherent temporal narratives. This perspective suggests that the sense of being a unified self, experiencing a coherent world, depends critically on your brain's ability to maintain precise temporal coordination across its various processing systems. When this coordination breaks down, as it sometimes does in certain neurological conditions, the unity of consciousness can fragment, leading to experiences where different aspects of reality seem disconnected or out of sync. Consider how this understanding might change your relationship to the present moment. What you experience as now isn't just a point in time, but a temporal construction, a binding together of information from the recent past into a coherent narrative about the present. The width of this temporal window, typically spanning several hundred milliseconds, defines the boundary of your experiential present. This temporal binding window helps explain why certain types of timing are so important for human experience. Music, for instance, works precisely because it operates within the temporal scales that your brain uses for binding. Rhythms that are too fast become indistinguishable, while rhythms that are too slow lose their sense of connection and coherence. The sweet spot for musical rhythm corresponds closely to the temporal windows your brain uses for binding sensory experiences together. Language operates within similar temporal constraints. The rhythm of speech, the timing of pauses, the coordination between gesture and word all reflect the underlying temporal binding mechanisms of the brain. When these timing relationships are preserved, communication feels natural and effortless. When they're disrupted, language can become difficult to follow or emotionally disconnected. As we prepare to explore the next dimension of temporal processing, take a moment to appreciate the remarkable coordination happening in your brain right now. Multiple streams of sensory information, each following its own timeline, are being woven together into the seamless experience of listening to these words while being present in your environment. This coordination happens automatically, beneath consciousness, yet it's essential for creating the unified reality you experience. But there's another layer to this temporal story, one that reveals perhaps the most surprising aspect of how your brain constructs the present moment. Not only does your brain bind information across different senses and different processing speeds, it also engages in something that seems almost impossible. It sometimes allows future information to influence past perceptions. This phenomenon, known as post-dictive processing, challenges our basic assumptions about the direction of causation in perception and reveals just how flexible your brain's relationship to time really is. In our next exploration, we'll discover how your brain sometimes works backward through time to construct the present moment, and what this reveals about the malleable, constructed nature of conscious experience. For now, rest in the knowledge that the coherent, unified reality you experience is one of the most sophisticated temporal constructions in the known universe, assembled moment by moment by the quiet genius of neural coordination. Something extraordinary is happening in your brain right now, something that seems to violate our most basic understanding of how time works. As you process these words, your brain is not simply interpreting information as it arrives. Instead, it's doing something that sounds impossible. It's allowing information that hasn't been processed yet to influence how it interprets information that has already arrived. This phenomenon, known as post-dictive processing, reveals one of the most surprising aspects of how your brain constructs the present moment. While we typically think of perception as a forward-flowing process where past events determine present understanding, your brain sometimes works in reverse, allowing future context to reshape past perceptions. It's as if your brain has developed a limited form of time travel, reaching forward into the immediate future to gather information that helps it better understand the immediate past. Take a moment to consider how radical this idea is. In the physical world, causation flows in one direction. The past influences the present, which influences the future. But in the realm of neural processing, these temporal boundaries become more flexible. Your brain can retrospectively revise its interpretation of sensory events based on information that arrives later, creating a kind of perceptual editing that happens beneath the threshold of consciousness. The classic demonstration of this phenomenon involves something called the color phi effect. When two colored lights are flashed in sequence at slightly different locations, observers often report seeing a single light that appears to move from the first position to the second while changing color along the way. But here's the mysterious part. The brain perceives the color change as happening during the apparent motion, even though the second color hasn't been processed until after the motion perception should have already been completed. This suggests that your brain somehow knows about the second color before it has finished processing it, and uses this advanced information to construct a coherent narrative about what happened. The perception of the first light's color can be influenced by the color of the second light, even though the second light appears later in time. It's as if your brain is editing the movie of perception in real time, adjusting earlier scenes based on what it discovers in later ones. This post-dictive processing extends far beyond simple visual effects. In speech perception, the meaning of ambiguous sounds can be determined by context that comes later in the sentence. A phoneme that could be interpreted as either one sound or another is often perceived based on which interpretation makes the completed word make sense. Your brain waits to gather more information before committing to a specific interpretation of what it heard. Consider what this means for your experience of understanding language. When you hear the beginning of a word, your brain doesn't immediately decide what that word is. Instead, it maintains multiple possibilities, keeping several potential interpretations active until enough information arrives to determine which one is correct. This process can take several hundred milliseconds, during which your brain is essentially holding the past in a state of uncertainty, waiting for the future to provide clarity. As you reflect on this process, notice how it might be operating in your current experience of listening. Your brain is likely anticipating where sentences are heading, maintaining multiple interpretations of ambiguous phrases, and continuously updating its understanding based on new information. The meaning you extract from these words emerges not just from the words themselves, but from the complex temporal dance between what has been said and what is yet to come. The neural mechanisms underlying post-dictive processing involve what researchers call temporal integration windows. During these brief periods, typically lasting a few hundred milliseconds, your brain treats incoming information as potentially related to recently processed information. Within these windows, later arriving information can influence the interpretation of earlier arriving information, creating the possibility for temporal revision. These integration windows are not fixed features of neural processing. They expand and contract based on context, attention, and experience. In complex listening environments, your brain might extend these windows to allow for greater flexibility in interpreting ambiguous sounds. During focused attention tasks, the windows might become more precise, reducing the temporal scope for revision, but increasing the accuracy of initial interpretations. The study of post-dictive processing has revealed something profound about the nature of conscious experience. What you perceive as happening in any given moment is not simply a record of what occurred at that moment. Instead, it's a retrospectively constructed interpretation that takes into account information from a brief temporal neighborhood around that moment. Your brain is constantly revising the recent past based on the emerging present. This temporal revision process helps explain why memory can be so malleable. When you remember an event, you're not simply retrieving a fixed record of what happened. Instead, you're reconstructing that event using both the original information and everything you've learned since then. The memory of the past is continuously influenced by the knowledge of the present, creating a dynamic, evolving narrative rather than a static historical record. The implications of post-dictive processing extend into the realm of decision-making and free will. If your brain is constantly revising its interpretation of recent events based on new information, then the experience of making a decision might itself be subject to temporal revision. What feels like a clear, decisive choice at one moment might be reinterpreted differently moments later as new context becomes available. Consider how this applies to social interactions. When someone says something that could be interpreted in multiple ways, your brain doesn't immediately commit to one interpretation. Instead, it waits to gather additional context from facial expressions, tone of voice, and subsequent statements. The meaning you ultimately extract from the interaction emerges from this complex temporal integration process, where later information influences the interpretation of earlier information. This post-dictive capability reveals the constructed nature of the present moment. What you experience as now is not a single point in time, but rather a temporal synthesis that incorporates information from the recent past, predictions about the immediate future, and ongoing revisions based on newly arriving information. The present moment is less like a photograph and more like a continuously updated documentary film. As you consider these ideas, take a breath and imagine what this could mean for your understanding of reality itself. If your brain is constantly engaged in temporal revision, continuously updating its interpretation of recent events based on new information, then the solid, stable world you experience might be more fluid and dynamic than it appears. The past, at least the very recent past, remains somewhat malleable, subject to reinterpretation as new information becomes available. The precision of these temporal revision processes becomes apparent when they're disrupted. Certain neurological conditions can impair post-dictive processing, leading to experiences where perception feels fragmented or where the normal flow of understanding is interrupted. These disruptions reveal how dependent our normal experience is on the brain's ability to integrate information across time, revising and updating interpretations as new context becomes available. Research using brain stimulation techniques has shown that disrupting activity in specific brain regions can alter the temporal windows for post-dictive processing. When these integration periods are shortened or lengthened, perception changes in predictable ways. Sounds that would normally be integrated into coherent speech become fragmented. Visual events that would typically be perceived as smooth motion appear as discrete, disconnected flashes. The evolutionary advantages of post-dictive processing become clear when you consider the challenges of perception in natural environments. The world is full of ambiguous sensory information that requires context for proper interpretation. A rustling in the bushes could be wind, a small animal, or a potential predator. By maintaining multiple interpretations until additional information becomes available, your brain can make more accurate assessments of what's actually happening. This temporal flexibility also helps explain why optical illusions and perceptual tricks can be so compelling. Many illusions exploit the brain's tendency to revise interpretations based on context. When later information contradicts earlier interpretations, the brain often chooses the interpretation that makes the most sense given all available information, even if this requires revising what seemed certain just moments before. The relationship between post-dictive processing and consciousness raises fascinating questions about the nature of subjective experience. If consciousness involves the integration of information across time, with later information influencing the interpretation of earlier information, then conscious experience might be fundamentally retrospective. You might be conscious not of what is happening now, but of what your brain thinks happened in the recent past, revised and updated based on subsequently available information. This perspective suggests that the stream of consciousness is less like a river flowing steadily forward and more like a constantly revised narrative, where each new chapter has the potential to reinterpret previous chapters. The story of your experience is being written and rewritten continuously, with each new moment of awareness potentially changing the meaning of moments that came before. As we prepare to explore how these temporal processes come together to create the unified experience of the present moment, consider how post-dictive processing might be shaping your current experience. The understanding you're developing of these concepts is likely being continuously revised as new information becomes available. Each new idea doesn't just add to your knowledge, it potentially transforms your interpretation of ideas that came before. The brain's ability to work backward through time, allowing future information to influence past perceptions, reveals the remarkable flexibility of neural processing. But this is just one component of an even more complex system that coordinates multiple temporal processes to create the seamless experience of being present in a dynamic world. In our next exploration, we'll discover how all these temporal mechanisms work together to solve what might be called the grand challenge of consciousness, creating the experience of existing in real time while processing information that is inevitably from the past. For now, rest in the wonder of this temporal flexibility. Your brain is not just a passive recorder of events unfolding in sequence, it's an active editor, continuously revising and updating the story of your experience based on an ongoing dialogue between past and future, memory and prediction, what has been processed and what is yet to be understood. The present moment you inhabit is not a fixed point in time, but a dynamic construction, constantly being refined and adjusted as your brain weaves together the complex temporal threads of perception into the coherent narrative of conscious experience. Deep within your skull, beneath layers of bone and tissue, an extraordinary coordination is taking place. Billions of neurons, each operating on its own timeline, somehow manage to create the unified symphony of your conscious experience. This coordination requires something like a conductor, a neural mechanism that keeps all the different temporal processes in sync, ensuring that the delayed, predicted, and post-dictively processed information comes together at just the right moments to create the seamless flow of awareness. The brain achieves this remarkable feat through what neuroscientists call neural oscillations, rhythmic patterns of electrical activity that sweep through different brain regions like waves across a pond. These oscillations act as temporal reference signals, providing a common timing framework that allows different parts of the brain to coordinate their activity across time. Without these rhythmic patterns, the various temporal processes we've explored would remain disconnected, creating a chaotic jumble rather than coherent conscious experience. Imagine these neural rhythms as the metronome that keeps a complex orchestra playing in time. Different sections of the brain, like different sections of an orchestra, may be playing different parts of the overall composition, but they all follow the same underlying beat. When a violinist and a cellist both hear the conductor's tempo, they can play their individual parts while remaining perfectly synchronized with each other, creating harmony rather than cacophony. Your brain employs multiple rhythmic frequencies simultaneously, each serving different temporal coordination functions. Some oscillations cycle many times per second, coordinating the rapid exchange of information between nearby brain regions. Others cycle more slowly, perhaps once or twice per second, helping to coordinate activity across larger brain networks and longer time scales. These different rhythmic layers work together like nested clock mechanisms, each keeping time at its appropriate temporal scale. The gamma rhythm, oscillating between 30 and 100 cycles per second, appears particularly important for binding together different aspects of perception into unified conscious experiences. When you see a red ball moving across your visual field, different groups of neurons process the redness, the roundness, and the motion separately. The gamma rhythm helps ensure that all these separately processed features are bound together in time, creating the unified perception of a single red moving ball rather than disconnected sensory fragments. As you consider this binding process, notice how it might be operating in your current perceptual experience. The words you're hearing, the visual environment around you, the feeling of your body in space, and any background sounds are all being processed by different neural systems operating at different speeds. Yet your conscious experience feels unified and coherent. This unity emerges from the coordinated activity of neural oscillations that bind these disparate elements together into a single, temporally coherent experience. The alpha rhythm, cycling at roughly 8 to 12 times per second, plays a crucial role in managing attention and consciousness. When alpha oscillations are strong in a particular brain region, that region becomes less responsive to incoming sensory information, as if the rhythm is actively inhibiting processing. When alpha oscillations weaken, the region becomes more receptive, allowing sensory information to flow through more readily. This rhythmic gating of information processing helps explain how attention shapes conscious experience. By strengthening or weakening alpha oscillations in different brain regions, your attention can selectively enhance some aspects of sensory input while suppressing others. The rhythm acts like a volume control, turning up processing in regions that are relevant to your current focus, while turning down processing in regions that might provide distracting information. The theta rhythm, oscillating at roughly 4 to 8 cycles per second, appears particularly important for memory processes and temporal coordination across longer timescales. During memory formation and retrieval, theta oscillations help coordinate activity between the hippocampus, where memories are initially formed, and the cortex, where they are ultimately stored. This rhythmic coordination ensures that information can flow smoothly between these regions despite the different processing speeds and temporal characteristics of each area. These neural oscillations are not just passive timing signals. They actively shape how information is processed and integrated across different brain regions. When two brain areas oscillate in sync with each other, information can flow between them more readily. When they oscillate out of sync, communication becomes more difficult, creating functional disconnections even between regions that are physically connected. This dynamic coordination allows your brain to rapidly reconfigure its functional networks based on current needs and circumstances. During focused attention, oscillations align to create strong connections between relevant brain regions while weakening connections to irrelevant areas. During creative thinking, oscillation patterns shift to allow for more flexible, wide-ranging connections between different brain networks. The same anatomical brain can function as many different brains simply by changing its oscillatory coordination patterns. The development of these oscillatory patterns reveals another fascinating aspect of how the brain learns to coordinate time. Infants are born with relatively simple, poorly coordinated neural rhythms that gradually become more sophisticated and better synchronized throughout childhood and adolescence. The maturation of oscillatory coordination parallels the development of more sophisticated cognitive abilities, suggesting that learning to coordinate time is fundamental to learning to think. As these rhythmic patterns mature, they become increasingly precise and flexible, allowing for more complex forms of temporal coordination. A young child's brain might struggle to coordinate attention and memory simultaneously, leading to difficulties with tasks that require holding information in mind while focusing on something else. As oscillatory coordination improves, these abilities become more robust and reliable. The social aspects of consciousness also depend critically on neural oscillations and temporal coordination. When you're engaged in conversation with someone, your brain must coordinate not just internal temporal processes, but also align its rhythms with the temporal patterns of social interaction. Research has shown that during successful communication, the neural oscillations of speakers and listeners can become synchronized, creating a kind of neural resonance that facilitates understanding and empathy. This social synchronization extends beyond conversation to many forms of human interaction. When musicians play together, when people dance together, when groups engage in coordinated activities, their neural oscillations tend to align, creating shared temporal frameworks that support collective action and mutual understanding. The experience of being in sync with others may reflect measurable patterns of neural coordination during interaction, where individual brains temporarily align aspects of their oscillatory activity. Take a moment to consider how these ideas might apply to your own social experiences. Think about times when conversation felt effortless and natural, when understanding seemed to flow smoothly between you and another person. These moments of social flow might reflect well-coordinated timing and attention between interacting nervous systems, creating optimal conditions for communication and mutual understanding. The disruption of neural oscillations can provide insight into their normal function. Certain neurological and psychiatric conditions are associated with abnormal oscillatory patterns, leading to characteristic disruptions in consciousness, attention, and temporal processing. In some forms of epilepsy, excessive synchronization leads to seizures, where normal conscious control is temporarily lost. In certain types of schizophrenia, reduced synchronization between brain regions may contribute to the fragmented, disconnected quality of experience that characterizes the condition. These clinical observations reinforce the importance of precisely coordinated neural oscillations for normal conscious experience. Too much synchronization can be as problematic as too little, suggesting that healthy consciousness requires a delicate balance of coordination and independence between different brain regions and different temporal processes. The study of meditation and contemplative practices has revealed that these activities can systematically alter neural oscillatory patterns. Long-term meditation practitioners often show enhanced coordination between different brain regions, more stable and coherent oscillatory patterns, and greater flexibility in shifting between different oscillatory states. These changes may underlie some of the reported benefits of contemplative practices, including improved attention, emotional regulation, and overall well-being. As you reflect on the role of neural oscillations in consciousness, consider how this understanding might change your relationship to your own mind. The coherent, unified experience of being conscious emerges from the coordinated activity of billions of neurons, all dancing together in complex rhythmic patterns. Your thoughts, perceptions, memories, and decisions all depend on this ongoing temporal choreography happening beneath the threshold of awareness. The precision required for this coordination is staggering. Neural oscillations must be maintained within very specific frequency ranges, synchronized across vast networks of brain regions, and flexibly adjusted based on changing circumstances and demands. That this coordination happens reliably, moment after moment, throughout your entire life, represents one of the most remarkable achievements in the natural world. Yet this coordination is not perfect or permanent. Neural oscillations can be disrupted by fatigue, stress, illness, or injury. They change throughout the day following circadian rhythms, and they evolve throughout the lifespan as the brain develops and ages. The dynamic, adaptive nature of oscillatory coordination helps explain why consciousness itself feels dynamic and changeable rather than static and fixed. The future of neuroscience may well involve learning to better understand and perhaps even therapeutically modulate these oscillatory patterns. If consciousness depends on precise temporal coordination, then treatments that can restore healthy oscillatory patterns might help address various neurological and psychiatric conditions. We might even develop ways to enhance normal oscillatory coordination, potentially expanding the capabilities and experiences of healthy consciousness. But even with our growing understanding of neural oscillations, the hard problem of consciousness remains. We can describe the neural mechanisms that support conscious experience, but we still cannot fully explain why there is something it is like to be conscious. Why the coordinated activity of neurons gives rise to subjective experience rather than simply complex information processing. As we prepare to explore the broader implications of temporal processing for our understanding of consciousness and reality, Take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary coordination happening in your brain right now. Billions of neurons, each following its own temporal dynamics, are somehow managing to create the unified experience of listening to these words while being present in your environment. This coordination requires no conscious effort on your part, yet it represents one of the most sophisticated temporal achievements in the known universe. The conductor of your conscious experience is not a single entity or brain region, but rather an emergent property of coordinated activity across your entire brain. Like a symphony where the music emerges from the interaction of many individual instruments, consciousness emerges from the temporal coordination of many individual neural processes. The result is something greater than the sum of its parts, the remarkable experience of being a unified self, existing in a coherent world, aware of both the past that has shaped you and the future toward which you're heading. As our journey through the temporal landscape of consciousness draws toward its conclusion, we arrive at perhaps the most profound question of all. What does it mean to exist in the present moment when that moment is revealed to be a construction, a carefully orchestrated illusion created by the brain's sophisticated temporal processing systems? Everything we've discovered about delayed perception, predictive processing, temporal binding, post-dictive revision, and neural oscillations points toward a startling truth. The present moment, as you experience it, does not exist in the way we typically imagine. There is no single instant that corresponds to now, no discrete point in time where all of your conscious experience is anchored. Instead, what you call the present is a temporal synthesis, a dynamic integration of information from the recent past, predictions about the immediate future, and ongoing revisions based on continuously arriving sensory data. This revelation might initially feel unsettling. If the present moment is constructed rather than directly experienced, what does this mean for the reality of your immediate experience? Are you living in an illusion, disconnected from the true nature of time and existence? The answer, surprisingly, is both yes and no. Yes, your experience of the present moment is a construction, a sophisticated neural narrative, rather than direct contact with reality. But no, this doesn't make your experience less real or less meaningful. In fact, it makes it more remarkable. Consider the alternative. Imagine if your brain could not perform these temporal gymnastics. If you were condemned to experience only the delayed, fragmented, temporally disconnected information that actually reaches your sensory systems. You would live in a world of confusion and disconnection, unable to coordinate action with perception, unable to understand speech or music, unable to navigate the dynamic complexity of social interaction. The constructed nature of the present moment is not a limitation, it's a liberation. Your brain has solved one of the most challenging problems in information processing: how to create coherent, unified experience from delayed, disparate, and temporally complex data streams. The present moment you inhabit is a masterpiece of temporal engineering, a solution so elegant and effective that it feels effortless despite being extraordinarily complex. Take a moment to appreciate this achievement as you sit with these ideas. Right now, your brain is integrating visual information that was processed 80 milliseconds ago with auditory information that was processed 50 milliseconds ago with proprioceptive information from your body that was processed at various delays depending on distance from your brain. It's combining this delayed sensory data with predictions about what should be happening now, and continuous revisions based on new information that's still arriving. The result is the seamless experience of being present, aware, and connected to your environment. This understanding invites a new relationship to the present moment, one that encompasses both its constructed nature and its profound significance. The present moment is not a thing you can grasp or a place you can arrive at. It's a process you're always participating in, a continuous creation that emerges from the complex temporal dance of neural processing. Contemplative traditions have long intuited this processual nature of the present moment. When meditation teachers speak of the impermanent, ever-changing nature of experience, they're pointing towards something that neuroscience now confirms from a different angle. The present moment is not static or fixed. It's dynamic, constructed, and constantly being renewed through the ongoing activity of temporal processing. But this scientific understanding also reveals why practices aimed at cultivating present moment awareness can be so transformative. By learning to observe the constructed nature of experience, by becoming aware of the temporal processes that create the sense of being present, we can develop a more flexible and less reactive relationship to our own consciousness. When you understand that your experience of the present moment emerges from prediction, that your brain is constantly generating expectations about what should happen next, you can begin to notice when these predictions are creating suffering. Anxiety often arises from predictions about future events that may never occur. Depression can result from comparing present experience to predicted outcomes that haven't materialized. By recognizing the predictive nature of present moment experience, you can learn to hold these mental projections more lightly. Similarly, understanding the post-dictive nature of perception can help you recognize how meaning and interpretation are continuously being revised. The story your brain tells you about what just happened is not a fixed record, but an evolving narrative that can change based on new information and shifting context. This recognition can foster greater flexibility in how you interpret events and respond to challenges. As you consider these ideas, notice how they might apply to your current experience. The understanding you're developing right now is itself a product of temporal processing. Your brain is integrating information from earlier parts of this exploration with current concepts, making predictions about where these ideas might lead, and continuously revising its interpretation of the overall narrative. The meaning you extract from this journey is not fixed at any single moment, but emerges from the ongoing temporal process of learning and understanding. The implications of temporal processing research extend beyond individual consciousness to our understanding of reality itself. If the present moment is constructed by neural processing rather than directly given in experience, what does this suggest about the nature of time and existence more broadly? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics propose that reality itself might be fundamentally processual rather than substantial, emerging from ongoing interactions rather than consisting of fixed entities existing in definite states. This is a philosophical interpretation inspired by physics, not a claim established by experimental neuroscience or quantum theory. While we must be careful not to overextend these parallels, there's something intriguing about the convergence between neuroscience's discovery of the constructed present and physics' suggestion that reality might be more process-like than our everyday experience suggests. This remains a speculative idea, not a proven scientific fact, but it points toward fascinating possibilities for understanding the relationship between mind and world. Perhaps consciousness and reality are more intimately connected than we typically imagine, not through direct causal influence, but because both involve ongoing processes of temporal integration and dynamic construction. The study of temporal processing also illuminates the social and cultural dimensions of time experience. Different cultures have developed varying relationships to time, emphasizing different temporal scales and rhythms. Some cultures prioritize long-term thinking and cyclical time patterns, while others focus on linear progression and immediate outcomes. Understanding how the brain constructs temporal experience can help us appreciate how these cultural variations might actually involve different ways of organizing and emphasizing the same underlying neural processes. Language itself shapes temporal experience in profound ways. Different languages carve up time differently, emphasizing different aspects of temporal relationships through their grammatical structures. When you learn a new language, you're not just learning new words, you're learning new ways of organizing temporal experience, new patterns for coordinating the brain's temporal processing systems. The development of technology also influences how we experience and construct the present moment. Digital devices, with their rapid streams of information and constant interruptions, may be challenging the brain's temporal processing systems in unprecedented ways. Understanding how the brain creates the sense of being present can help us develop more mindful relationships with technology, using it in ways that support rather than fragment our temporal coherence. As we near the end of our exploration, consider what this understanding might mean for how you live your daily life. Knowing that the present moment is constructed doesn't diminish its significance, but reveals its true nature as a dynamic, ongoing process in which you're always already participating. The constructed present moment is not a barrier between you and reality. It's the very means by which you can engage with reality in all its complexity and beauty. Your brain's temporal processing systems don't separate you from the world. They connect you to it in the most sophisticated way possible, allowing you to navigate, understand, and appreciate the rich temporal tapestry of existence. As you go about your daily activities, knowing that your experience emerges from this intricate temporal coordination can foster a sense of wonder rather than disconnection. When you watch the sunrise, you're not just seeing light that left the sun 8 minutes ago and was processed by your brain 80 milliseconds ago. You're experiencing a dialogue between past and present, between prediction and perception, between the ancient light of a distant star and the immediate creativity of your own neural networks. When you listen to music, you're experiencing one of the most direct demonstrations of your brain's temporal processing capabilities. The melody emerges not from individual notes, but from the relationships between notes across time. Harmony arises from the brain's ability to integrate multiple temporal streams simultaneously. Rhythm speaks directly to the oscillatory patterns that coordinate conscious experience. In music, the temporal nature of consciousness finds its most natural expression. Consider how this understanding might transform your relationship to memory and anticipation. Your memories are not passive recordings of past events, but active reconstructions that incorporate everything you've learned since those events occurred. Each time you remember something, you're not just retrieving the past, you're reconstructing it, informed by the present moment and shaped by your predictions about the future. Similarly, your anticipation of future events is not separate from your present experience. It's an integral part of how your brain constructs the current moment. Your hopes, fears, plans, and expectations are all woven into the temporal fabric of consciousness, influencing how you perceive and interpret immediate experience. This integrated relationship between past, present, and future suggests a more fluid understanding of temporal existence, rather than seeing yourself as trapped in an eternal present, separate from past and future. You can recognize yourself as a temporal being whose very existence spans multiple temporal scales simultaneously. You are your history, your present experience, and your anticipated future all at once, integrated into a coherent temporal narrative by the remarkable processing capabilities of your brain. The social implications of this understanding are equally profound. When you interact with another person, you're engaging in a complex temporal dance where two sophisticated prediction systems attempt to coordinate their activities. Successful communication requires not just shared language, but shared temporal frameworks, synchronized oscillations, and coordinated predictions about how the interaction will unfold. This temporal coordination helps explain why some conversations feel effortless, while others feel awkward or stilted. When temporal frameworks align, when predictions synchronize, when the rhythm of interaction flows smoothly, communication becomes a form of temporal art. When these coordinations break down, conversation becomes laborious and disconnected. Understanding the temporal nature of consciousness can also illuminate the experience of flow states, those moments when time seems to disappear and action becomes effortless. During flow, the brain's predictive systems become so well calibrated to the immediate environment that the normal delays and revisions of temporal processing fade into the background. Prediction aligns so closely with incoming sensory information that the constructed nature of the present moment becomes transparent, creating an experience of immediacy and presence that feels almost timeless. The implications extend to creativity and insight as well. Creative breakthroughs often involve novel temporal integrations, new ways of connecting information across different timescales, or unexpected revisions of existing temporal narratives. When artists speak of inspiration arriving suddenly, they may be describing moments when their brain's temporal processing systems achieve new forms of coordination, allowing previously unconnected ideas to bind together in meaningful ways. As our exploration draws to a close, take a moment to reflect on how this journey through the temporal nature of consciousness might continue to unfold in your own experience. The understanding you've developed here is itself a temporal construction, built from the gradual integration of concepts across the time we've spent together. This understanding will continue to evolve as you encounter new experiences and perspectives that will retrospectively revise and enrich your interpretation of these ideas. The mystery of consciousness remains profound despite our growing understanding of its temporal foundations. We can describe the neural mechanisms that create the experience of being present, but we cannot fully explain why these mechanisms give rise to subjective experience rather than simply complex information processing. The hard problem of consciousness persists even as we unravel the temporal processes that support conscious experience. But perhaps this ongoing mystery is itself part of the beauty of consciousness. If consciousness is fundamentally temporal, fundamentally processual, then it may be that its nature cannot be captured in any final complete description. Like the present moment itself, consciousness may be something that can only be participated in, never fully grasped or definitively explained. This brings us full circle to where we began, with the recognition that you are not experiencing reality in real time. But now this limitation reveals itself to be something far more interesting than a simple delay or deficiency. Your brain's temporal processing systems transform you into a temporal artist, constantly creating coherent experience from the complex interplay of memory, perception, prediction, and revision. You are not passive recipients of reality, but active participants in how experience is constructed. Through your brain's temporal processing, you help create the very present moment you experience. This reflects established principles in neuroscience rather than metaphysical claims. The present moment emerges from the activity of consciousness, and consciousness emerges from the temporal integration of neural processes. In recognizing this, you might find a new appreciation for the profound creativity involved in simply being conscious. Every moment of awareness represents an achievement in temporal coordination that rivals the most sophisticated technologies humans have ever created. Your brain is constantly solving temporal puzzles that would challenge the most advanced computers, and it does so with an elegance and efficiency that we're only beginning to understand. As you continue your journey through life, carrying these insights with you, remember that the present moment is not a destination to reach, but a process to participate in. The temporal nature of consciousness means that being present is not about stopping time or escaping temporal flow. It's about recognizing yourself as a temporal being, fully embedded in the ongoing process of creating the present moment through the remarkable capabilities of neural temporal processing. The next time you watch clouds move across the sky, listen to rain falling on your roof, or feel your breath moving in and out of your body, remember that these experiences emerge from one of the most sophisticated temporal orchestrations in the known universe. Your consciousness is a temporal symphony, playing itself into existence moment by moment, note by note, breath by breath. In this recognition, perhaps you can find both humility and wonder. Humility in realizing that your experience of reality is mediated by complex neural processes rather than direct contact with the world. Wonder in appreciating the extraordinary sophistication of these processes and the remarkable experience they create. You are not separate from time, but deeply embedded in it, not victimized by temporal delay, but empowered by temporal integration. The present moment you inhabit is neither an illusion to be escaped, nor a reality to be grasped. It's a process to be appreciated, a temporal artwork created by the ongoing activity of your own consciousness. In understanding this, you might find a new form of presence, one that encompasses both the constructed nature of the present moment and its profound significance as the only temporal location where life can actually be lived. And so we conclude our journey through the temporal landscape of consciousness, having discovered that the question of why your brain never experiences reality in real time opens into questions about the nature of time itself, the construction of experience, and the remarkable temporal creativity that makes consciousness possible. The delay that initially seemed like a limitation has revealed itself to be the foundation for one of the most extraordinary achievements in the natural world, the creation of unified, coherent, conscious experience from the temporal complexity of neural processing. In the pristine laboratories of quantum physics, something extraordinary happens every time a scientist attempts to measure the properties of a subatomic particle. The very act of observation involves an interaction between measuring instruments and physical systems, a phenomenon often referred to as the observer effect, without implying a role for human consciousness itself. Consider the famous double-slit experiment, where individual particles of light or matter are fired toward a barrier containing two openings. When no detector is present to determine which slit each particle passes through, an interference pattern appears. When a detector is introduced, the interference pattern disappears. This change results from physical interaction with the measuring apparatus, not from awareness or intention. It's tempting to describe this behavior as if the universe exists in a state of pure potential until consciousness looks. But modern physics explains these results through measurement interactions rather than conscious observation. The implications remain profound, but they concern the nature of physical systems under measurement. This quantum behavior mirrors something that contemplative traditions have long explored about subjective experience. In meditation practice, practitioners often discover that observing thoughts and emotions changes how those experiences unfold. This reflects well-studied attentional and regulatory processes in the brain, rather than direct influence over physical reality. As you reflect on this possibility, notice what happens when you turn your attention toward your own present moment experience. Perhaps you become aware of the sensation of breathing, the feeling of your body against whatever surface supports you, the quality of sounds in your environment. The act of observing these phenomena can subtly change how they are experienced, a documented effect of attention in cognitive neuroscience. The quantum principle of superposition suggests that particles can exist in multiple states until measurement occurs. As a metaphor, this resembles the fluid, undefined nature of experience before interpretation. Before you name an emotion or categorize a sensation, the experience may feel open to multiple meanings. Take the simple experience of sitting quietly. Before you label it as relaxing or boring, pleasant or uncomfortable, meaningful or meaningless, the raw experience itself contains many possible interpretations. The moment awareness arrives with its categorizing function, one particular interpretation crystallizes from the field of possibilities. This intersection between quantum mechanics and contemplative practice becomes intriguing at a philosophical level, especially when we consider the role of observation in both domains. In physics, measurement involves interaction. In contemplative practice, awareness shapes subjective experience. The Buddhist concept of dependent origination, which suggests that all phenomena arise in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions, resonates conceptually with modern physics' view of reality as process-based rather than composed of isolated objects. These are parallel ways of describing complexity, not claims of direct equivalence. As you consider these parallels, take a breath and allow yourself to sense the participatory nature of your own awareness. You are not a passive observer of experience, but an active participant in how experience is interpreted and lived. The quantum concept of entanglement shows that physical systems can exhibit deep correlations across distance. Contemplative traditions have long pointed toward interconnectedness in lived experience. These similarities are analogical rather than scientifically causal. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness itself might be entangled with the systems it observes, but this remains speculative and outside established scientific consensus. The development of quantum technologies has revealed how delicate quantum states can be. This fragility mirrors what contemplative traditions observe about subtle mental states, which can be disrupted by distraction or agitation. Yet both quantum systems and contemplative practices can exhibit coherence under the right conditions. In physics, coherence enables lasers and superconductivity. In psychology, coherence supports clarity, emotional regulation, and insight. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics continues to raise foundational questions. While there is no scientific consensus that consciousness is required for measurement, these discussions continue to inspire reflection across physics, philosophy, and cognitive science. As we prepare to explore how these ideas might inform contemplative practice, take a moment to appreciate the mystery of being conscious at all. Whether or not consciousness influences quantum events, the fact that you can reflect on these questions represents an extraordinary achievement of evolution. In our next exploration, we'll discover how contemplative practices can shape subjective experience and mental coherence, and how cultivating certain qualities of attention can support clarity and presence. But for now, rest in the wonder of existing at the intersection of consciousness and cosmos. Deep within contemplative traditions lies a treasure trove of practices designed to cultivate extraordinary states of consciousness. States where the ordinary boundaries between self and world soften, where time seems to change character, and where awareness expands beyond habitual patterns. These states, reported across cultures and centuries, share conceptual parallels with behaviours observed in quantum systems. Consider the contemplative state known as pure awareness or Rigpa in Tibetan Buddhism. Practitioners describe this as a condition where awareness rests without fixation on particular objects. This description is experiential rather than scientific, but it offers insight into how consciousness can be experienced differently. The cultivation of such states often involves non-grasping attention. This stance resembles, at a metaphorical level, the conditions required to preserve coherence in delicate physical systems. The practice of mindfulness, now widely studied by neuroscientists, involves maintaining moment-to-moment awareness without being swept away by experience. Research shows measurable changes in brain function and connectivity. While this is not quantum coherence, it represents neural coherence emerging from sustained practice. Some contemplatives report experiences of non-locality that bear intriguing resemblances to quantum entanglement. Advanced practitioners sometimes describe a sense of being connected to distant locations or people in ways that transcend ordinary spatial boundaries. While these reports remain subjective and cannot be empirically validated using current scientific methods, they point toward dimensions of consciousness that classical models of mind struggle to explain. The experience of timelessness, frequently reported in deep meditative states, offers another parallel to quantum phenomena. In contemplative states where awareness becomes very still and spacious, the ordinary flow of time can seem to stop or become irrelevant. Practitioners may emerge from such states feeling as though hours have passed when only minutes have elapsed, or conversely, that only moments have passed during hours of sitting. This malleability of temporal experience resonates with quantum mechanics' revelation that time and space are far more flexible than classical physics assumed within specific physical models. As you reflect on these possibilities, consider how your own experience of time changes in different states of consciousness. During moments of deep absorption in beautiful music or profound conversation, does time seem to slow down or speed up? During periods of anxiety or boredom, does time feel heavy and slow? Your consciousness already demonstrates a remarkable psychological flexibility in its relationship to temporal flow. The cultivation of what Buddhists call beginner's mind or don't know mind creates a quality of openness that parallels the indeterminate nature of quantum systems before measurement. This practice involves approaching each moment with fresh awareness, without preconceptions about what will be found there. Like a quantum particle existing in superposition, as a metaphor, Don't Know Mind maintains openness to all possibilities rather than collapsing prematurely into fixed interpretations. This contemplative stance can be profoundly liberating. When you approach your experience without already knowing what you'll find there, when you allow awareness to be surprised by what emerges, you create space for genuine discovery. The same anger you've experienced countless times can reveal new dimensions when met with truly fresh awareness. The same familiar environment can become luminous and interesting when perceived through Don't Know Mind. The practice of loving-kindness meditation offers yet another parallel to quantum phenomena. When practitioners cultivate genuine goodwill toward all beings, including those they've never met and may never encounter, they're developing a form of non-local care that extends beyond the boundaries of direct relationship. While this is a symbolic comparison rather than literal, physical non-locality, it represents an expansion of concern that transcends the usual limitations of self-interest. Research on loving-kindness meditation has shown that it can increase positive emotions and social connectedness while reducing implicit bias and stress-related inflammation. Some preliminary studies have even suggested correlations between group meditation practices and changes in surrounding social indicators, though these findings remain controversial and require further investigation. This is an emerging research area, not a proven scientific conclusion. The contemplative understanding of emptiness, particularly as developed in Mahayana Buddhism, bears striking resemblance to quantum field theory's revelation that apparent particles are actually temporary excitations in underlying fields. Both perspectives suggest that what appears solid and independent is actually interdependent and process-like. The table you're sitting near, the air you're breathing, your own body and thoughts all arise through the interaction of countless causes and conditions rather than existing as independent, inherent entities. This insight can fundamentally transform how you relate to both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. When you realize that neither your happiness nor your suffering exists as a solid, permanent thing, but rather as temporary patterns arising from multiple conditions, you can relate to both with greater equanimity and wisdom. Like quantum particles that exist only in relationship to other particles and fields, as an analogy, your experiences exist only in relationship to the complex web of causes and conditions that give rise to them. If you enjoy drifting through these explorations without interruption, members get every episode 48 hours early, completely ad-free. You can join them whenever you feel ready. The practice of Dzogchen, or Great Perfection, in Tibetan Buddhism involves recognizing what practitioners call the natural state of mind, a condition of effortless awareness that requires no maintenance or cultivation. This natural state is said to be always, already present, like space itself, requiring only recognition rather than creation. This parallels quantum field theory's understanding of quantum fields as the fundamental substrate of reality, always present even when no particles are being manifested, as a conceptual comparison rather than a scientific equivalence. The cultivation of equanimity, a quality of balanced awareness that remains stable regardless of changing conditions, creates a kind of contemplative coherence that parallels the stability of certain quantum states. Like quantum systems that maintain coherence despite environmental fluctuations, equanimous awareness can remain clear and stable, even when thoughts, emotions, and sensations are changing rapidly. As you explore these parallels, remember that contemplative practice is not about achieving special states or exotic experiences. It's about recognizing the extraordinary nature of ordinary awareness itself. The consciousness with which you're listening to these words right now already contains all the mystery and wonder that quantum physics reveals at the subatomic level, in an experiential rather than literal physical sense. The task is not to create something new, but to recognize what is already present. The development of these contemplative capacities often follows patterns similar to the conditions required for quantum coherence. Just as quantum systems require isolation from environmental noise and disturbance, contemplative states often emerge from conditions of reduced sensory input, minimal mental agitation, and sustained attention. Retreat environments, with their emphasis on silence, simplicity, and reduced stimulation, create conditions analogous to the isolation chambers used to maintain quantum coherence in laboratory settings at a metaphorical level. Yet, unlike quantum systems, consciousness demonstrates remarkable robustness. While quantum coherence is typically fragile and easily disturbed, contemplative awareness can maintain its essential qualities even in challenging conditions. Experienced practitioners can maintain meditative awareness while engaged in daily activities, demonstrating a form of coherence that is both subtle and remarkably stable. The integration of contemplative insights into daily life represents a unique challenge that has no direct parallel in quantum physics. While physicists can create isolated laboratory conditions for studying quantum phenomena, contemplatives must learn to maintain awakened awareness in the midst of relationships, responsibilities, and the constant flux of ordinary life. This integration requires developing what might be called quantum flexibility, used here as a descriptive metaphor. The ability to maintain essential qualities of awareness while adapting to changing circumstances. As we prepare to explore how these contemplative practices might actually influence physical reality, take a moment to appreciate the profound mystery of consciousness itself. Whether or not awareness directly affects quantum systems, the fact that the universe has evolved beings capable of both contemplative wisdom and quantum understanding represents an extraordinary achievement of cosmic evolution. You are participating in the universe's attempt to understand itself, using the very consciousness that quantum mechanics suggests might play a fundamental role in physical reality according to some interpretations. In our next exploration, we'll examine the controversial but fascinating research into how contemplative practices might influence measurable aspects of physical reality, from the molecular level of gene expression to hypothesized non-local effects that remain under active scientific debate. But for now, rest in the recognition that your awareness itself is perhaps the most quantum-like phenomenon you'll ever encounter, as a metaphor for its flexibility and indeterminacy, demonstrating properties of superposition, non-locality, and observer participation that mirror the deepest mysteries of modern physics. Beneath your conscious awareness, within every cell of your body, quantum mechanical processes are unfolding with extraordinary precision and elegance. The oxygen you breathe, the food you digest, the very thoughts arising in your mind, all depend on quantum effects that operate at the intersection of physics and biology. Your body is not just a classical mechanical system. It is a quantum biological system, a living laboratory where the strange behaviors of subatomic particles manifest as the miracle of life itself. Consider the process of photosynthesis happening right now in plants throughout your environment. When sunlight strikes a leaf, Quantum coherence allows energy to travel through the plant's molecular networks with remarkable efficiency, exploring multiple pathways simultaneously before settling on the optimal route to the reaction center. This quantum efficiency helps explain how plants convert sunlight into chemical energy with an effectiveness that surpasses our best human-designed solar technologies. Some researchers suggest that similar quantum processes might be operating within your own body. The enzyme reactions that power cellular metabolism, the electron transfer chains that generate the energy molecules your cells require, the complex molecular machines that read and copy your DNA, all of these fundamental life processes may depend on quantum mechanical effects that classical biology is only beginning to understand. Take a moment to sense your body from within, feeling the subtle aliveness that pervades every cell. The warmth in your hands, the gentle rhythm of circulation, the quiet hum of metabolic activity, all of this emerges from quantum processes happening trillions of times per second throughout your biological system. In this sense, you are not just conscious of quantum reality, you are quantum reality becoming conscious of itself. The microtubules within your neurons, the protein structures that help maintain cellular architecture, may serve as quantum processing systems according to some controversial theories. While the scientific consensus remains uncertain about quantum effects in warm, wet biological systems like the brain, some researchers propose that consciousness itself might emerge from quantum processes occurring within these cellular structures. This remains highly speculative and is not accepted by mainstream neuroscience, but it points toward fascinating possibilities for understanding how consciousness relates to quantum mechanics. If awareness does emerge from quantum processes in the brain, then contemplative practices that influence consciousness might also influence the quantum systems that support awareness in theory. The field of quantum biology has revealed surprising examples of quantum effects in living systems. Migratory birds may navigate using quantum entanglement in specialized proteins in their eyes, allowing them to literally see magnetic fields. Some bacteria appear to use quantum tunneling to optimize the efficiency of their metabolic processes. Even the sense of smell might depend on quantum effects that allow molecules to be recognized by their vibrational frequencies rather than just their chemical structure. These discoveries suggest that life has evolved sophisticated ways of harnessing quantum mechanical effects for biological advantage. Your body represents the culmination of billions of years of evolution learning to work with, rather than against, the strange behaviors of quantum reality. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of consciousness emerges from this ancient partnership between life and quantum mechanics. Research into the effects of contemplative practices on physical health has revealed changes that extend down to the molecular level. Studies of long-term meditators have found alterations in gene expression, reduced inflammation markers, enhanced immune function, and even changes in telomerase activity that may influence cellular aging. While these effects can be explained through conventional biological mechanisms, they demonstrate that contemplative practices can influence physical reality in measurable ways. The stress response provides a clear example of how consciousness influences quantum biological processes. When you experience stress, your nervous system triggers a cascade of molecular changes that affect everything from hormone production to immune function to gene expression. Contemplative practices that reduce stress reactivity can reverse many of these molecular changes, demonstrating a direct pathway from consciousness to quantum biology through established physiological mechanisms. As you reflect on this mind-body integration, notice how your current mental state might be influencing your physical experience. Are there areas of tension or relaxation in your body that correspond to your emotional state? Can you sense how shifts in awareness create subtle changes in physical sensation? This immediate feedback loop between consciousness and embodied experience may reflect deeper biological integration. The placebo effect represents one of the most dramatic examples of consciousness influencing physical reality. When patients believe they are receiving effective treatment, this belief alone can trigger real physiological changes, including pain relief, immune system enhancement, and even alterations in brain chemistry. While the mechanisms underlying the placebo effect are not fully understood, they demonstrate that the content of consciousness can directly influence biological processes. Some researchers have proposed that the placebo effect might involve quantum mechanical processes, though this remains highly speculative and lacks scientific consensus. The idea suggests that conscious expectation might influence quantum processes in the brain that then cascade into broader physiological changes. While intriguing, this hypothesis requires much more research before it can be considered scientifically validated. The emerging field of psychoneuroimmunology studies how psychological states influence nervous system function and immune response. Research has shown that chronic stress can suppress immune function, while positive emotional states can enhance it. Contemplative practices like loving-kindness meditation have been found to increase positive emotions and boost immune markers, suggesting direct pathways from consciousness to physical health. These findings don't necessarily involve quantum mechanics, but they demonstrate clear connections between mental states and biological processes. If consciousness can influence immune function, hormone production, and gene expression through conventional biological pathways, it's not unreasonable to wonder whether subtler quantum effects might also be involved, as an open scientific question. The concept of coherence appears in both quantum physics and biological systems. Just as quantum coherence allows for efficient energy transfer in photosynthesis, biological coherence allows for optimal function of living systems. Heart rate variability research has shown that coherent heart rhythms are associated with improved cognitive function, emotional stability, and overall health. Contemplative practices that promote physiological coherence may be creating conditions similar to those that support quantum coherence in biological systems at an organizational level. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics takes on new dimensions when applied to biological systems. If consciousness plays a role in quantum measurement, and if biological systems depend on quantum processes, then the relationship between awareness and physical reality becomes even more complex and intriguing. While this intersection remains poorly understood, it suggests possibilities for conscious participation in the processes that support life itself. As you consider these possibilities, take a breath and sense the quantum nature of your own embodied existence. The oxygen molecules entering your lungs, the neural processes supporting your thoughts, the cellular activities maintaining your body's temperature and chemistry. All of these depend on quantum mechanical effects that connect you intimately to the fundamental nature of physical reality. The practice of body awareness, central to many contemplative traditions, takes on new meaning when understood in quantum biological terms. When you bring mindful attention to bodily sensations, you're not just observing classical mechanical processes. You're potentially influencing biological systems through the quality of awareness you bring to them. This is a contemplative interpretation rather than a confirmed scientific mechanism. The ancient yogic understanding of the body as composed of energy rather than just matter resonates with quantum field theory's revelation that particles are temporary excitations in underlying energy fields. While yogic energy concepts like prana and chakras cannot be directly equated with quantum fields, both perspectives suggest that the body is more process-like and dynamic than classical mechanical models suggest. Breathwork practices, found in many contemplative traditions, may influence the biological processes that support cellular metabolism. The rhythm and depth of breathing directly affect blood chemistry, nervous system function, and cellular energy production. Some practitioners report that specific breathing techniques can induce altered states of consciousness, suggesting possible connections between respiratory practices and the biological processes that support awareness. The integration of contemplative practice with scientific understanding opens new possibilities for working with the quantum biological nature of embodied existence. Rather than seeing the body as a machine to be fixed or controlled, we can recognize it as a quantum biological system that responds to the quality of awareness we bring to it. This perspective suggests possibilities for health and healing that go beyond conventional medical approaches while remaining compatible with established scientific frameworks. As we prepare to explore how contemplative communities might create collective effects that extend beyond individual practice, take a moment to appreciate the quantum biological miracle of your own existence. You are not separate from the quantum processes that physics reveals at the subatomic level. In a descriptive sense, you are those processes, organized into the extraordinary complexity and beauty of a living, conscious being. Every moment of awareness, every breath, every heartbeat represents the universe exploring its own quantum nature through the remarkable emergence of biological consciousness. In our next exploration, we'll examine the controversial but fascinating research into whether contemplative practices might create measurable effects that extend beyond individual practitioners, influencing the broader environment in ways that challenge our understanding of how consciousness relates to physical reality. But for now, rest in the recognition that your body is a symbolic quantum temple, a sacred space where the deepest mysteries of physics manifest as the ongoing miracle of conscious life. Something remarkable happens when contemplatives gather together with shared intention. The quality of awareness that emerges from group practice often feels qualitatively different from individual meditation, as if the collective field of attention creates conditions for deeper insights and more stable realization than would be possible for isolated practitioners. This phenomenon, reported across cultures and traditions, raises intriguing questions about whether consciousness might have field-like properties that can interact and amplify across space. Consider what happens in a comfortable meditation hall where dozens of practitioners sit in silent awareness together. The quality of attention in such spaces often feels palpable, as if the collective commitment to presence creates a field of heightened awareness that supports each individual's practice while extending beyond the sum of its parts. While we currently lack scientific tools to directly measure such fields, the subjective reports of enhanced clarity, deeper stillness, and more stable insight in group practice settings suggest possibilities that conventional models of isolated individual awareness struggle to explain. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If awareness has field-like properties similar to the quantum fields that underlie physical reality, then the interaction between conscious beings might create emergent phenomena that extend beyond individual minds. This is a speculative hypothesis without scientific consensus, but it opens intriguing avenues for understanding how contemplative communities might influence their broader environments. Research into group meditation effects has produced some controversial but intriguing findings. Studies of large meditation gatherings have reported correlations with reduced crime rates, decreased emergency room visits, and other social indicators in surrounding areas during the periods of intensive practice. These findings remain disputed and require further investigation before any causal relationships can be established. The correlations could result from numerous factors unrelated to the meditation itself. Yet these preliminary observations, even if ultimately explained by conventional means, point toward the possibility that concentrated collective awareness might have influences that extend beyond the immediate participants. Whether through subtle social mechanisms, indirect behavioral effects, or pathways we do not yet fully understand, the gathering of conscious intention seems to create conditions that ripple outward into the broader community. As you reflect on this possibility, consider your own experience of group awareness. Think about times when you've been part of a collective focused on shared purpose, perhaps during a moment of silence for a tragedy, a concert where the audience becomes completely absorbed in the music, or a gathering where everyone's attention converged on a single, meaningful event. In such moments, there often emerges a quality of collective presence that feels larger than the sum of individual consciousnesses. The phenomenon of resonance, well understood in physics, might offer insights into how collective awareness operates. When tuning forks of the same frequency are placed near each other, striking one will cause the other to begin vibrating at the same frequency through sympathetic resonance. Similarly, when conscious beings gather with shared intention, their individual awareness fields might begin to resonate with each other, creating amplified coherence that enhances the quality of attention for all participants as a conceptual analogy rather than a physical equivalence. This resonance model remains metaphorical rather than scientifically proven, but it provides a useful framework for understanding how contemplative communities might support enhanced awareness. The regular gathering of practitioners, the shared commitment to specific qualities of attention, and the cultivation of similar mental states could create conditions where individual consciousness becomes mutually supportive and amplifying. The development of such collective fields often requires what contemplatives call attuning to each other's awareness. This involves developing sensitivity to the quality of attention present in a group and learning to contribute to rather than disturb the collective field of awareness. Experienced practitioners often report being able to sense when someone in a group is agitated or deeply concentrated as a subjective interpersonal sensitivity, suggesting that consciousness may have subtle interactive properties that extend beyond individual boundaries. The training required for such sensitivity parallels the precision needed for quantum experiments. Just as quantum systems require careful isolation from environmental disturbance, the cultivation of collective awareness requires participants who can maintain stable attention without creating mental or emotional noise that disrupts the group field. This is not about conformity or suppression, but about developing the capacity to be fully present while remaining sensitive to the larger field of shared awareness. Historical accounts from various contemplative traditions describe remarkable phenomena arising from group practice. Sufi communities speak of collective dhikr sessions, where individual consciousness seems to merge into a unified field of remembrance. Zen sanghas described group sittings where the quality of silence becomes so profound that it feels almost tangible. Indigenous traditions include ceremonies where the entire community enters altered states of consciousness that feel qualitatively different from individual practice. While these accounts remain subjective and cannot be independently verified through scientific measurement, they point toward possibilities for collective consciousness that challenge individualistic assumptions about the nature of awareness. If consciousness has feel-like properties, then the interaction between multiple conscious beings might create emergent phenomena that transcend what any individual could achieve alone. The study of synchronized behavior in nature offers additional insights into how collective fields might operate. Schools of fish move as unified organisms, with thousands of individuals coordinating their movements through local interactions that create global patterns. Flocks of birds demonstrate similar collective behavior, responding to threats and opportunities as if they were single entities rather than collections of separate individuals. These natural examples of collective coordination suggest that consciousness might similarly demonstrate emergent properties when multiple aware beings interact with shared intention. The mechanisms would likely be different from those governing fish schools or bird flocks, but the principle of local interactions creating global patterns might apply to fields of awareness just as it does to physical systems. The cultivation of loving kindness or compassion in group settings often produces particularly strong collective effects. When communities gather with the shared intention of generating goodwill for all beings, participants frequently report experiences of expanded heart connection that extends well beyond the immediate group. This suggests that emotions and intentions, when collectively focused, might create fields of influence that extend into the broader environment through social and psychological mechanisms. Research into the effects of prayer and distant healing has produced mixed but occasionally intriguing results. While the majority of studies show no clear effects, some carefully controlled experiments have suggested possible influences of focused intention on distant targets. These findings remain controversial and are not accepted by mainstream science, but they raise questions about whether collective focused attention might have subtle influences that extend beyond the immediate participants. As you consider these possibilities, take a moment to sense your own participation in the larger fields of awareness that surround you. Even as you listen to these words, you're connected through various communication networks to countless other conscious beings. The ideas you're contemplating have been shaped by the insights and investigations of many minds across time. Your understanding emerges not from isolated individual thought, but from participation in the collective human endeavour of exploring consciousness and reality. The internet and global communication systems create new forms of collective awareness that were impossible in previous eras. When millions of people focus their attention on the same event, whether a natural disaster, a scientific discovery, or a moment of historical significance, a kind of global field of shared awareness emerges. While this is mediated by technology rather than direct consciousness-to-consciousness connection, it demonstrates the human capacity for collective attention on unprecedented scales. These technological forms of collective awareness might represent early stages in the evolution of more sophisticated forms of shared consciousness. As our understanding of both contemplative practices and communication technologies develops, we might discover new ways of creating beneficial collective fields of awareness that support both individual development and collective well-being. The cultivation of such fields requires what might be called contemplative citizenship, a willingness to take responsibility for the quality of awareness we contribute to collective spaces. Just as environmental consciousness involves recognizing our impact on physical ecosystems, contemplative consciousness involves recognizing our impact on the fields of shared awareness we participate in throughout our daily lives. This perspective suggests that individual contemplative practice is never purely individual. The quality of awareness you cultivate through meditation, mindfulness, or other practices contributes to the larger fields of consciousness that influence families, communities, and potentially even global patterns of thought and emotion. Your inner work becomes a form of service to the collective evolution of consciousness. The integration of contemplative practice with social action reflects this understanding of interconnected awareness fields. Many contemporary teachers emphasize that genuine spiritual development must include engagement with the suffering and challenges of the world, not as separate from contemplative practice, but as its natural expression. When awareness expands beyond individual boundaries, it naturally recognizes the suffering of others as inseparable from one's own. As we prepare to explore how these insights might transform our understanding of what it means to be conscious in a quantum universe, take a moment to appreciate your participation in the vast network of awareness that connects all conscious beings. Your individual consciousness is both unique and irreplaceable, and simultaneously part of larger patterns of collective awareness that extend across space and time. Whether through direct consciousness to consciousness connection, or through the subtle influences of shared intention and attention, contemplative communities continue to explore the possibilities for beneficial collective awareness. These explorations remain largely experiential rather than scientifically proven, but they point toward dimensions of consciousness that conventional models of isolated individual minds cannot adequately explain. In our final exploration, we'll discover how understanding consciousness as both quantum and collective might transform our relationship to existence itself, offering new possibilities for living with greater wisdom, compassion, and connection in a universe that appears far more conscious and interconnected than classical science ever imagined. But for now, rest in the recognition that your awareness is not isolated, but participates in the vast field of collective consciousness as a philosophical and experiential perspective that encompasses all beings capable of knowing and caring. As our exploration draws toward its completion, we arrive at perhaps the most profound recognition of all. You are not separate from the quantum universe we have been investigating. In an experiential and poetic sense, you are the quantum universe investigating itself. Every moment of contemplative awareness, every insight into the nature of consciousness, every recognition of interconnection represents the cosmos evolving toward greater self-understanding through the remarkable emergence of conscious beings capable of both scientific inquiry and contemplative wisdom. As our journey through this quantum contemplative landscape draws to a close, perhaps the most profound insight is not something we've discovered, but something we've remembered. You've always been both the scientist studying quantum mechanics and the meditator exploring consciousness. You are the universe contemplating itself through the extraordinary emergence of awareness capable of questioning its own nature. The delayed processing of your brain, the quantum mysteries humming within every atom, the observer effects in both laboratory and meditation hall, all point toward a reality far more participatory and consciousness involved than we ever imagined. According to certain philosophical interpretations, Whether through the neural orchestrations that create your sense of the present moment, or the quantum processes that may underlie life itself, you exist at the intersection where matter becomes aware of itself. The boundary between observer and observed, between consciousness and cosmos, may be far more fluid than classical thinking suggests. In recognizing this, perhaps we find not answers, but better questions, not certainty, but deeper wonder. Rest well in the recognition that your awareness is not separate from the quantum universe, but is deeply embedded within it as part of its unfolding story. If you found meaning in this exploration, you might discover how consciousness first emerged from the cosmos in how consciousness began, when the universe first became aware.